Muhami Matters with Chris Adams, powered by CJA Consulting.
Where I could see the greatest impact was working with managers and kind of junior to mid leaders, because at the end of the day, they spend the most time with employees in a business. They'd surveyed hundreds of businesses and looked at training spend for the previous year, and the 85% of it was spent on things like sales training, account development training and things like that. And only 5% was being spent on developing managers and leaders, which to me just seems completely crazy.
What does effective leadership development look like? First of all, what elements do you see? And then secondly, what then should you do with them to help them become successful leaders?
It's the people skills, it's the desire to work with other people, willing to take a role that's not necessarily in the limelight at times for the good of a team.
Welcome to Muhami Matters, where credibility meets clarity in legal and professional services. As always, I'm your host, Chris Adams, founder of Muhami and CJA Consulting. Today, we're in for a treat. We're joined by Briony Platt, founder of Lean Into Learning, DISC practitioner, and someone who knows exactly what it takes to grow successful managers. Briony has spent 25 years in recruitment before launching her own consultancy, and her story from high-performing biller to frustrated manager onto successful leadership trainer is something that I think many of our audience will relate to. We're going to explore today what really happens when people are promoted without preparation, how tools like DISC can transform leadership, also transform self-awareness and communication within teams. So, Briony, without any further ado, welcome to Muhami Matters, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, did I get all the facts right? Give us a little bit of background on you, where you're from, and how you've kind of gotten to where you are now.
So the facts are absolutely straight. You've got those all right. I spent 25 years working in the recruitment industry and started as a consultant, was a manager, managed a couple of different teams, recruited in professional services, primarily accountants and then HR people. So I was recruiting people like myself, I guess, later on in my career, recruiting HR professionals and learning and development specialists. And then I really enjoyed developing people. So I'd been doing that as part of my role as a junior manager. Loved seeing people succeed. And when an opportunity came up internally to move into a training position, I grabbed it with both hands. So I started training recruitment consultants, then started working with managers. And over the years, I've helped support people at a variety of different levels in businesses in the roles that I've had where I was still employed. And then had a bit of a shift when I set up for myself a few years ago and decided that my focus would be at the management and leadership level. So that's where I am.
So I think one thing I've seen in my career is that really HR teams don't actually get that much training or support. Usually they're the ones that are sort of seen as the ones that have to give it. So I like your approach because it is quite different, and it must be that these teams really need that support. Is that why you started Lean Into Learning?
When I started the business, I'd got the opportunity to do a variety of things. So I trained, as I mentioned, at all levels in the organisation when I was in the employed role. And I loved the variety of what I did. But where I could see the greatest impact was working with managers and kind of junior to mid leaders, because at the end of the day, they spend the most time with employees in a business. So if we can work with those people and get those people really capable, really confident in the roles that they're doing, that has the greatest impact on a business. So when I'd spent time earlier in my career spending a lot of my time working with consultants, that obviously has a degree of impact on any business. But if you can work with the managers that then influence the capability, confidence and success of their people, it just has a much bigger impact on a business. So I see it as a bit of a kind of ripple or multiplier effect by focusing on the layer that I do.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's almost like a waterfall, isn't it? It trickles down, but you don't trickle necessarily from the top, you trickle from the middle.
Yeah. And anybody who goes on training, you get a degree of increase in somebody's success from the piece of training that they've been on. But where the greatest impact is when they return back to their teams and they start implementing it. So if as a business you spend a lot of money and time invested in sending your salespeople, for example, on sales training, there'll be a degree of impact from that. But if they go back to their teams and the managers aren't capable of giving them feedback and coaching them, then the investment in that sales training probably will never be as fulfilled as it would be otherwise.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've almost got to train the trainer, and you've got to, everyone, the whole team has to be all rowing in the same direction, I guess.
Exactly.
And without the professional advice or training, then how do you get there? As you said before that your own promotion to leadership left you feeling a bit unsupported and frustrated. Can you tell us a bit more about that experience and how it's shaped your approach?
Yeah, so I was a high performer in the role that I was doing. So I was one of the highest performers in the team, and there was always a plan for me to move into a management role, but it just happened in an unplanned way, if that makes sense. So somebody left the business, and there was an opportunity to step up, and I was asked to step up into that role, but did it without any real support. So in that planning phase of thinking at some point in the future, Briony will be responsible for a team, the only piece of training or support that I'd had was a day of coaching, which was a complete and utter farce, if I'm perfectly honest.
Really?
The only thing that I remember from it genuinely was that we learned to fold a water lily out of a napkin. Now, I have no idea why we were doing that. I've no idea what the link was with how to coach people, but I certainly didn't go away from that day feeling that I was better equipped to coach and develop people. So that's all that I'd had. 6 months into the role, I was struggling, honestly. So I didn't really know what I was supposed to be doing. I'd not really been given much guidance or too much done in terms of expectation setting. And I probably was going from one extreme to the other of looking over people's shoulders and trying to insert myself in there to help them, but probably interfering and not necessarily very welcomed in doing that. And then in the next breath, I'd just be leaving them alone and hoping that they were okay while I focused on my own work and my own billing, neither of which obviously are the right answer. So my own billing had already taken a bit of a hit because I was distracted and looking at other things, and I just wasn't enjoying it. So I didn't think I was very good at it. I wasn't objectively very good at it because I didn't know what I was doing. And it was just a chance conversation that I had with my manager where she'd said, "You just don't see myself at the moment. You seem a bit distracted." And I ended up blurting out in that conversation that I was looking for another job because that's how I'd felt was the only option for me, that I couldn't say I want to step back into my old role. I'd have felt like too much of a failure and an idiot, which I think would be a very common feeling for people. So I felt that the only option was going to be for me to go to another company to do the role that I'd done previously, that I'd been incredibly successful at. And when she heard that, she was horrified and immediately arranged for me to have some management training, which changed everything. So it changed how I felt about it. It meant that I felt as though I'd got tools and techniques and skills to do the job. I was clearer on what I was supposed to be doing. So it changed everything for me. I felt more confident about it. I was doing a better job at it. And it obviously impacts on the success of the team members that I was responsible for.
Yeah. What kind of training was it? What was this magic result?
Magic.
Yeah.
It was a leadership program. So it was over a number of months. We were going along and having a day or two at a time, learning some things, going away, implementing them, learning some more, and working with a group of people. So we felt quite safe with each other to practice and have a go at things. And it just built over time. So after the first session, with some simple things of having conversations like giving people feedback and that you need to adapt your style for the different people that we were working with. So the first couple of days just put a big light bulb on over my head, and I understood more clearly what I was supposed to be doing. So then going back a few weeks later and learning some more and implementing that, it just built over the course of a few months and made a huge difference.
So it was bit by bit. That is quite a good approach, because sometimes you see training that's just, 48-hour master classes that just, they try and squeeze everything in, and, you as a person, you're human, you can't take in much more than about 2 hours of content, right? So that does sound like a very sensible approach.
Yeah, I worked in a different business afterwards where logistics really dictated that we did it as a full week of training. So Mud just came along for 5 full days, and they were very full days as well. And realistically, their ability to go away and implement the things was limited by just having too much at once.
Yes.
So I think there can be extremes. There can be not enough. There can be too little. And there can be the opposite extreme.
So how has that, I guess, then shaped your approach today? What did you take from that you tried to instill in others?
So when I'm putting together programs for other businesses, I use a lot of the things that I've mentioned. So things tend to be spread over time. Hopefully not too long, because otherwise you're waiting for the impact of it for too long in a business. So I think an ideal amount of time for leadership programs, probably 3 months, maybe a maximum of 6. Mm-hmm. Trying to get people away from their day job can be tricky. So if you were to do a series of sessions with a few weeks or a month in between them, I think that's absolutely fine. I think there's importance in doing some stuff face-to-face. So with the vast majority of clients that I work with, face-to-face will be at least part of the program, because I think that people build stronger connections, stronger relationships. They take it more seriously and in a more focused fashion when there's at least some of it face-to-face. While I think that the dreaded COVID, it gave us a lot of benefits. I think we have to see a lot of silver lining out of what happened during that time, and the connections that we built and the ability that we created to be able to do things virtually. I don't like to rely on virtual unless there's a need for it. So I'm working with a leadership group at the moment that is spread from everywhere on the west coast of the States through to Eastern Europe. So trying to get all of those people in a room on a regular basis just isn't going to happen.
Absolutely.
And that's fine, and we make it work with what we've got. But where teams can get together for at least part of the programme, I thoroughly encourage it. We might then do some sessions that are virtual. There might be some pieces where there are small group sessions in between as well to keep building on what we're doing in the room. But I do try to get face-to-face in for part of it. I think that screens can equal distractions at times. Both for the individual and for other people who are just trying to get the attention of that individual. It's much harder to get into a room and get hold of them than it is to pop them a message on Teams or on Outlook or whatever. So it tends to be spread over time, tends to have a mixture of different things, and I'm a big advocate of it being enjoyable. So not too serious, that there's some fun to it. I tend to rock up into rooms with games and all sorts of bizarre things that my husband can't believe at times that I managed to link into a training message. I gave an idea to a fellow leadership trainer last week when she was looking for an activity to wrap up a programme. And I said, get Scrabble. But she said that they were competitive. So I said, get some kits of Scrabble and get them creating just like the linked words and things with all the things that they've covered during the session. And she said it worked beautifully. So I like something that's fun, that's a bit different. I like them to walk in the room and think, what are we doing today? And how is that going to help me?
I'm really buy into the fun bit. I remember, well, in my career in corporate, I was very rarely offered much training. And the occasions that I was, it really felt like a privilege. And it really felt like, you go, your colleagues are going to cover for you. You can actually get out, focus on it, and try and learn. And I learned a lot. It just didn't happen often enough. So what do organizations need to start thinking to get their managers' mind shifts to shift gear?
I think a few different things. So if I kind of approach it from what I think can go wrong or what I think people can get wrong, I think of a lack of investment. So not enough money set aside for leadership and management development. I was looking at some stats at an event I was at a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying that they'd surveyed hundreds of businesses and looked at training spend for the previous year, and that 85% of it was spent on things like sales training, account development training and things like that. And only 5% was being spent on developing managers and leaders, which to me just seems completely crazy. because moving into a management role is just another specialism to what the person's done previously. So I think a lack of investment, a lack of awareness of how important that investment is probably another thing. Whether it's delivered by people internally or externally, that there's a focus to it. There needs to be a focus. So it needs to be something that is seen as a priority and not something that can be picked up and put down when other things take precedence. That can be one of the issues, I think, with some businesses where the leadership development might actually be delivered by a senior leader in the business. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with businesses that do that. Some businesses will do that and can make it work really effectively, but it has to be a priority. So it has to be a big part of that person's job, that person's responsibility, that person's focus to make sure that those sessions happen. It can't just be something that's off the cuff in reaction to something that's happened. It needs to be something that's got some plan, has got some focus to it. So I think if having awareness of it, having a desire and agreement to invest in it, and then making sure that it happens in whatever is the right way for that business, whether, as I say, it's an internal person or an external. That internal person could be a senior leader, it could be somebody with a learning and development team delivering those sessions, or it could be for a lot of businesses that they find that using the external specialist can be the right way for them to go, because that allows somebody to come in, bring best practice from other organisations and a focus to it. Which makes sure it happens.
You're moving back to the thinking about the individuals now. So you mentioned at the beginning you were earmarked for success. You were earmarked for moving up the ranks, moving up management levels, basically. And you were not being offered adequate training. What about those who weren't really being earmarked? Because for me, I've seen a lot of people who would really benefit from training and really maybe, haven't got along with the boss well, or just haven't been spotted for whatever reason and haven't really had that opportunity to have any training, let alone, you were earmarked and you didn't get the training.
Yeah.
So
I was earmarked for a strange reason, though, which happens in lots of organisations. So I was earmarked for being a high performer. But just because somebody's a high performer at a role doesn't mean that they will make a great manager. So some people will have that kind of tag on them because they're seen within an organisation because they're seen as being good at their job. But for a large proportion of those people, actually moving into a management position isn't necessarily the right thing for them or the people that they then manage.
Yeah, I guess if you're a salesperson, you're seen as a high performer. That doesn't mean you should be managing the rest of the sales team because
exactly
that's not your strength. Now that makes sense. So therefore, what should management, or the organization be looking at? What sort of characteristics of their team should they be trying to spot in order to focus training on the right people?
I think probably people. This sounds like a really woolly answer, but people with people skills. So people who show an interest in others, who show a desire to support others. I think that's key. So while I say that a large part of why I was earmarked was probably because of my performance, it was also because I enjoyed developing people. So where managers had a new starter and they were looking for somebody to have a new starter shadow them and take them along to meetings they were having, I was always willing to do that. So there was probably an element of that. But if somebody's not showing those kind of signs, I would question their desire to have responsibility for people and whether they've got the capacity and motivation to be good at it. So I think people skills is a big part of it. There needs to be different routes for promotion in organisations. So I think a lot of people step into a management role because they feel, or they're offered a management role because that's the only opportunity for it to look as though they're progressing. But I think it's important to recognise that that's not right for everybody and to have different opportunities. I can think of one person in particular from earlier on in my career who, for cultural reasons, needed to be seen to be progressing. So kind of family standing and being a good provider, that equated to promotions. That's how it was measured. but actually he wasn't right to manage. He didn't want to manage. He had no desire to do it. But in order to be seen as the person who was providing for his future wife, he took a promotion that just wasn't right. So it's recognising people's motivations for things as well, and looking at, with that situation, I can think of really creative ways that we could have ticked the box for him in the nicest possible way.
Yeah.
But while giving him something that he enjoyed and not risking other employees' engagement by putting into a manager's role that wasn't right for him.
Yeah, I guess you've also got to understand what ticks people's boxes as well. Because it might, as you say, it sounds to me like he wanted more money or more benefits, whether he wanted to spend that on his wife or just for appearances.
He needed it for appearances, so he needed a new job title that looked like a promotion. Yeah. But as a business, we could have created that. We could have given him something that allowed him to do that while still making really good use of his skills and capability in a role that was right for him.
So then we touched a little bit on leadership. So not everybody's suitable for team leadership, and they need to be developed in other ways. In your experience, what does effective leadership development look like? If you spot those people that do look, well, first of all, what elements do you see? You mentioned people skills. And then secondly, what then should you do with them to help them become successful leaders?
Coming back to spotting them, it's the people skills, it's the desire to work with other people, it's being willing to take a role that's not necessarily in the limelight at times for the good of a team. So I think that at times you can spot whether that will suit somebody or not. And that their success is going to be measured by the success of their people, not necessarily them as an individual. So I think those are the kind of things that I would add to the people skills to spot the right people for leadership. And then what to do with them is start developing them over time. So to me, that would look like starting to delegate tasks and projects to them that allow them to get a bit of a taster for it, and to work out whether they still want to do it, whether it works for them, whether they enjoy it. So it doesn't have to be formal development. It doesn't have to be investing in a big training program for them. It can just be starting to drip feed some things that they can take some extra responsibility. So it might be, as I did, taking responsibility for a new starter, creating an induction plan for them, having them shadow that person for a period of time. It could be identifying something that they're really good at and asking them to run some sessions for other members of the team just to help develop them in those areas. It could be supporting them to become a mentor for a new person or for somebody who's stepping up to do a role similar to theirs. So I think there are ways to start developing people that give them an opportunity to taste it and decide whether they think it's right, while potentially alongside starting to develop their skills, which doesn't have to be a leadership program. It could be communication skills. It could be, I do a lot of disc profiling, so it could be raising their awareness of themselves and others through having them attend some kind of training like that. I think there are ways to develop people and get them started, get them on the first rungs of the ladder.
So that brings us on to DISC. What is DISC and how is it used?
So DISC is a behavioural profiling tool. So it's looking at personality types, and DISC stands for four main personality types. D is for dominance, I is for influence, S for steadiness, and C for conscientiousness, although you'll see on some models it's compliance. So there are a variety of different DISC models and frameworks out there. And through an assessment tool, what it looks like is what are the characteristics that somebody demonstrates, and kind of, without putting them in a box, assigning them one of those styles that is how they're likely to behave in most circumstances. So going with that dominance profile, Ds, as we tend to refer to them, tend to be quite direct, quite challenging. They like to get things done. They're very results and goal-oriented. Is for influence are very enthusiastic, creative, motivated, and tend to influence people, tend to be able to get people on board with things. They're very sociable, very enthusiastic. I might have said that already. S for steadiness. So that profile tends to be very loyal, very stable, very patient, very accommodating. They dislike conflict, so they prefer harmony. So great for bringing harmony into a team. And the C's, conscientiousness, are very analytical, very detail oriented, very focused. They're great for going through, for example, a contract or a tender and identifying all the little nuances and making sure that everything's covered. So they're not necessarily attributed to different roles. So they don't necessarily dictate how somebody will perform in a role. But if somebody's in a role where the natural traits aren't aligned with it, they might struggle. So it's probably going to impact on their enjoyment of the role as much as anything.
Okay. So if you have a team, let's say a team of 4 people, do you have to have a dominant D, dominant I, dominant S, and dominant C in that team in order to be a great team, or is it a little bit irrelevant?
Yeah, not necessarily.
Yeah.
But great teams are made up of a blend of people because it means that you've got all the areas covered. So if you were to think of having a team where nobody is interested in the details, then things are going to slip at times. And in some teams, that's going to be more important than others. If you had a finance team where nobody's interested in the detail, that's going to be a huge issue. If you had an absence of Ds, so the Ds are the people who drive things and get things done, then you might find that targets aren't hit, that timescales slip and things like that. If you had a team where you had no S's, you might find that there's a lot of conflict going on and nobody's trying to smooth anything over. You might find that you have got a lot of people who aren't particularly tied to the organisation. That loyalty might not be as strong. So you can see how the different traits lend themselves to creating a great team. You don't have to have one of each. It's not quite as straightforward as that because we're all actually a blend of all 4 styles. So we've all got the ability to do the different styles, to act in those different ways. What it does, though, is zap our energy. So, for example, the lowest part of my profile is the C, so the detail, the analytical piece. As somebody who runs my own business, I have to do the finance, for example.
That'd be contentious, yeah.
I have to do that bit. But what I need to do is make sure that I'm not banking all of my accounting to do all in a couple of days before end of year or before a VAT return's due, because that will completely zap my energy and I will thoroughly hate it. Quite honestly, I was going to say disenjoy. Disenjoy I don't think is even a word, but I definitely won't enjoy that. So where that then feeds into leadership is thinking about who do I delegate certain tasks and projects to? Who's naturally going to be aligned with that? Who's going to enjoy it? Who might I need to do it, but I need to recognise that it's not a natural inclination for them, and therefore it might be a little bit demotivating because it's something that they don't enjoy as much. It might be something that's very energy draining. So I need to make sure that I've got things to balance that out. So I need to make sure that they're able to spend some time doing something that they enjoy more. I need to make sure that they've got some time built into that day or that week where I'm asking them to perform on that project, where they get to do things that are energising as opposed to draining.
Yeah, that was really important here on the spot. Yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's really useful to understand it. I was talking to a new coachee this morning, going through her DISC profile, and she just said it all makes sense. So why I struggle with these kind of conversations makes sense because I don't like conflict. Where there's sometimes some conflict between myself and one of the senior people in the business is because we're very different styles to each other, and he wants me to move on things quickly, whereas I need to sit back and reflect on it and think about the answer and do a pros and cons list before I go back to him with a definitive decision on something. So I can see why we sometimes clash, but I feel equipped to go and flag that and explain what I need that will help me be more successful. And I know now what to look for in the person that reports into me and how to set things out in a way that will help him be more successful.
So it's a lot about self-awareness then, and self-awareness, but awareness of others that you're working with as well. So it can't just be, the people who are senior to that team identifying it. Obviously, that's important, but the people within the team themselves need to understand their own characteristics and those in their team.
Yep. Where it works best in organisations, so ideal scenario is that the senior leadership team participate in it. So they have some awareness training, they have their profiles done, so they get to understand themselves, they start to understand people around them in their own teams, and then it's cascaded. So ideal world, that's what businesses would do with it. They can use it for all sorts. They can use it for external relationships as well as internal ones. So you can do profiles related to sales as well as related to management and how people work with each other, so that they could start to recognise, for example, with salespeople, they could start to recognise what profile are my clients likely to be. Being able to identify that, because if you were my client, I can't send you a link and say, Chris, can you just fill this in for me so that I can understand what disc profile you are and therefore I can sell to you more effectively. That's not going to work, is it? But through conversations, through written communication perhaps that we have with each other, I'm likely to be able to identify what your profile is and therefore be able to adjust my style and things that I do in order to appeal more to you. And that could be, for example, that I identified your style was more D than anything else. And I would know that in my communications with you, I need to be to the point. I need to be succinct. I probably need to just have a handful of bullet points on an email to you rather than big paragraphs of information, because that's what's going to appeal to you and allow you to make decisions and move things forward. So it's as useful externally as it is internally, depending on the roles that people do, obviously. But ideal scenario, senior part of the business, understanding it, and a language that then goes through an organisation.
So then that was going to be one of my next questions. Then how do you actually do a disc profile on someone or on your team? Do you need to sort of put them all in a room and lock them in and get them to respond to a questionnaire or something? Like how does this work?
It's fun to pop them in a room and just lock them in, but that might lead to some slightly different consequences than we're hoping for. So doing a profile is a link. It's done online. So the model that I use is done online. They're taken through a series of statements and questions and asked to rank whether something's more like them, less like them, etc. And the tool behind the scenes creates a profile for them. So it will show them where they sit on a disc map. So what's really useful over time is when the whole team have done it, to be able to map everybody on what's essentially a circle on the framework that I use. So you can see where there's representation of different styles and where there's not. You can quite easily then see where people are very different to each other and recognise where that creates conflict. Is not necessarily fisticuffs conflicts, but just friction potentially between people who are working together. You might have people who actively avoid working together because they struggle with that. But raising their self-awareness as to why they might struggle with it and simple things that they can do in order to make that easier can be a huge step from it. So the link it's just a link. It's done online. Each person then gets their own profile, and then the tool that I use also has an online platform element to it, which allows people to go in and create team maps. So for any kind of team that are working together, so it might be the leadership team, it could be a project team for a specific piece of work. It could be literally the team of people that work together on an ongoing basis, and they can compare themselves with each other. So if you and I worked in the same business and I was about to start on a project with yourself, or if I was your manager about to onboard you into the business, I could go on and do a bit of comparison, my profile against yours, see where we've got similarities, see where we've got differences, and the tool gives me strategies and suggestions as to how to work more effectively with you.
So how do you sell it to your team? How do you get your team to all complete their disc profiles? Do they get suspicious? Are they thinking, why does my manager want me to complete this online profile? What's the game? Like, what's the end game?
Yeah, I have seen people suspicious of it. So it depends on how it's communicated and how it's described to people. So what I do with some businesses is give them a sample profile, which they can share with their team to give them an idea of what they're going to get. So It's not necessarily going to be identical to their profile because there's lots of differences, but to give them an idea of what they'll get on the back end of it. And some of the key principles or kind of cornerstone kind of frameworks to it, to understand that we're all a blend of the different styles, that no one style is better than another style, that there's no judgment on what style somebody is. It's just information and awareness, both for them as an individual and for other people working with them. And to give them some ideas, I tend to give them feedback from people who have gone through the process before and what kind of outcomes they got from it. So I'll send them a few sound bites that they can share with their team. I also try to engineer it that I get to communicate with them directly before I send them the profile link and before we do some awareness training on it, so that they can get that information directly from myself and make sure that it's explained.
So have you got any examples, Briony, where you've seen DISC being used by managers to become more effective leaders, especially through the work you've been doing with your clients?
Absolutely. In a variety of different businesses. I could give you examples of people and what they've done with it.
Tell us a story. You all love a good story.
I'm trying to think of a specific story. So there was a business I was working with a little while ago, manufacturing business, which was a little bit unusual for me at that point in time. I've not really done much work in that industry sector, but I've since worked with a few different manufacturing clients. And we worked on DISC profiling with a number of different teams at a certain kind of level through their business. And there's one particular person from that sent me a message almost immediately after the session to say, I've been thinking about this overnight, and a lot of what's happened over the last 6 to 12 months just makes sense. So where I've struggled to get people to do something, or I've struggled to understand why they're reacting in a certain way to something I've asked them to do, it all now makes sense. So what that person was then able to go and do was adjust their style to get better outcomes from the different team members. So using an example that I shared earlier on, just with their person who was a high D, they just reduced the amount of information that they were giving that person. So they were just more direct, more concise, and for that person's benefit, changed the way that they ran their team meetings. So up until that point, they'd done team meetings where everybody went round a little bit like creeping death, and everybody had to give an update for a number of minutes and talk through everybody's individually. And the person who was the high D would find that incredibly frustrating, having to listen to everybody else's rather than being able to get on with it. That person happened to be a more experienced member of the team, so didn't need to know the ins and outs of what some of the more junior members of the team were doing, arguably. So she changed the approach and did one-to-one meetings with that person to understand their individual stuff, had the team meetings with people in smaller groups as opposed to a big setting, and then brought them together for things that were useful for them to all be in the same place at the same time as a team. And she said that made a huge difference to the success of the team overall, but also to the way people felt and how engaged they were. How engaged they were as well when they did come together as a team, because they knew that it was then going to be useful, as opposed to half an hour of the hour meeting was not relevant to them.
Yeah, I've been in that situation where you're in these long meetings and people are blabbing and blabbing on, and in the back of your mind, you're like, I've got to deliver something. I've got a deadline today. And can we not just crack on with this thing and get it done? Yeah, I think it's rare in business you've got that time to just sit there and listen to people and relax. So I could completely identify that. But also, it's hard to focus for that long. It's really, you want to give people the best attention you can. It's quite difficult to do.
Absolutely. And what I do with businesses as well is I try to avoid it being a kind of one-hit wonder where I come in for a day, work with their team for the day, they get exposed to it for that day, they get the profile, but the profile goes in a drawer and gets forgotten about forevermore. So what I do with businesses is drip feed them activities to do. So quite often on a monthly basis, and I can do it one of two different ways. Different clients prefer different things. And there are a few clients where I send them almost like a menu of activities and suggested things that they do, and they just pick and choose and use those whenever it suits them. And with others, I literally send them something on a monthly basis that goes to a group of people across the business saying, here are 2 or 3 suggested things to do this month. So it's just keeping it alive and keeping people, as I said earlier, using that language on an ongoing basis, which makes it easier when new people join the organisation because they're slotting into something where they can see DISC as being a thing that's useful within their business.
So you mentioned earlier you don't often work with, say, manufacturing. What kind of companies do you generally work a lot with? Where do you find the most need?
I do work with a variety. About 70% of my work is still with sales and recruitment businesses, which kind of makes sense because I spent over 20 years in that industry.
Yeah.
That's where a lot of my network is as well. So where I'm going to people who know me or they're coming to me, it tends to be people that I've worked with in some guise or people that I've been referred to in the similar industry sector. But outside of that, I've got a number of kind of long-standing repeat clients, 2 or 3 in the manufacturing industry. I work with a couple of branding and marketing organisations, a couple of tech businesses, and a number in professional services. So
what prompts them to come to you? What's the prompt that they think, okay, I need to go and get some help from Briony?
Well, I think it's probably multi-layered. So first of all, it's recognising that there are some issues within the organisation that need some kind of support or work or fixing. And those might be things, they could be data driven. So they might see that they've got a higher turnover of staff than they'd like to have or that they have in the past. They might be scaling, and therefore they need to make sure that they've got a solid framework of decent managers across the organisation. So they recognise, I've got a few clients that it's kind of music to my ears that they come to me saying, we know we need to develop this solid group of people to allow us to grow over the next few years. But it could be driven by negative data, engagement data, attrition data and things like that gives them an indication something needs to change. Some are just invested in doing it, so they might then come to me externally because potentially they've had an internal resource previously that unfortunately over the last few years has had to be reduced, and therefore they need somebody external to come in. Some people like to come to an external provider because it's a fresh pair of ears and eyes that gives them other types of information outside of just training their people. So it can be a variety. So I think it's recognising that something needs to happen. That could be driven by things that they're observing in their organisation. It could be driven by just little nudges of articles they're reading, LinkedIn posts that they see that resonate with them and things like that. And then it's choosing how they go about doing it. So if they've seen me appearing a lot in networking events or in their LinkedIn feed, then it might be me that they call, or it could equally be somebody else.
Okay, yeah. So it sounds like it's the organisations that are a bit proactive, that want to build their people, that have spotted that gap and, want to invest in their people, or those who have realised a little bit too late and then realise they need to fix it, and they come to you. So you mentioned DISC quite a lot. I remember when I did some professional training with one of the companies I was with, and we did a session on emotional intelligence, and I can't remember which model it was. But it was like eye-opening for me personally because I thought I was really highly emotionally intelligent. It turns out I'm not, or I wasn't. Probably still not. I don't know. But, it made sense to me as to why the person I sat next to, I don't always see eye to eye with, even though we were doing the same job and actually we got along really well sometimes. But on other occasions, it just didn't work. Yeah. So what do you do alongside DISC?
So as part of leadership development, I work on a lot of different things. So there are communication skills that obviously are hugely important in leading somebody. It could be as simple as improving somebody's listening skills, improving somebody's questioning skills to create conversation, as opposed to just expecting information to land with them. We look at leadership styles, so we look at the fact that people need different things. So they need different things from the person responsible for them at different stages in their career, according to the different tasks that they're doing. So there are lots of ways in which leaders do need to adapt their style. So one of the examples that I use on a regular basis is the stages that somebody goes through when they're learning. So my eldest son has learned to drive recently. So in the first few lessons, when he was learning the very basics, he needed something very different from the driving instructor than in the last couple of lessons before he takes his test.
Yes.
So he needs training to begin with, then he needs coaching. So there's just a really simple example of different things different, almost like functions that the manager or the leader needs to perform, depending on what the person needs from them. So DISC stars are going to come into it. Awareness of the other person is going to come into it. What they need in terms of their level of development is going to come into it. It could also be linked to whether the fact that somebody could be performing better is linked to a skill issue, which might need training or coaching, or is to do with a motivation issue, which might be a lack of engagement. It might be that the person's being asked to do something that they hate doing, and therefore they're never going to enjoy doing it.
Yep.
So we cover things like that. We cover feedback conversations. We talk about coaching. We talk about how to delegate tasks to people in a way that makes sure that that task is done and it's done well. Recognise the fact that people develop in things over time. So not expecting that it might be done perfectly first time round, but that learning and making mistakes is a good part of somebody's development. And we look at things like how to build really effective teams. So what kind of characteristics or traits need to be in place, and how, as a leader, you can influence and build those in teams over time. So there's a variety of different things. It depends on what an organisation needs and the areas of focus and the level of investment that they've got available, both in terms of money and in terms of time, as to what might go into an initial programme and what might be something that we could bolt on at a later point in time. But I tend to start with most organisations with one of two key programmes, tailor those for them according to what they need, and then we build on them over time.
Perfect. So if somebody doesn't know what they need and they just want to have a chat to you, how can they get in touch?
You can get in touch in a variety of different ways. So I head most people through to my LinkedIn. So there are a variety of ways through LinkedIn to get in touch. They can book straight in for a collaboration call if they want to do that. There's no obligation for doing that. It's just a conversation to get us started. I will send through that can go with the episode a Linktree link as well, which allows people to go through to various ways to contact me, but also some different resources that they can have a look at that might help them in the meantime, or give them a flavour as to the way that I work and what I might do with them. So there's a variety of ways.
Perfect. I think I'm going to try and do a DISC assessment and just see if that's going to help me and my business and spotting my own strengths, I guess, but also my own profile, but also that, as you said, that are my clients and the people I work with. Yeah. Which can only make me a better business person, right? Or a better person, maybe.
Absolutely.
So, Briony,
do that for you.
Oh, that'd be great. That'd be great. So, there's one thing that every senior leader today listening should do to better support their managers. What would it be?
Sit back initially and observe deliberately and objectively. So, I think as senior leaders, we can make assumptions as to how well somebody's performing, how much somebody's enjoying the role, how engaged they are, etc. And we might work on the basis of no news is good news. But I think starting to scratch the surface and deliberately listening, deliberately creating conversations with people to find out how they are, to find out what kind of support that they need, and asking them for feedback as to what you could be doing to support them better. I think that those would all be really good places to start.
It's all about communication.
It's all about conversation.
So, Briony, you've given us a lot of really great tips from your own personal perspective and experience today. Are there any specific resources you recommend that myself and our listeners can go to?
There's a few different things that I always point people to. And whether you are a book reader, an audiobook listener, somebody who likes an overview in 10 minutes as opposed to the whole thing, three things that I would point you to. I'm going to show you the book because I happen to have them on my bookshelf. So Kim Scott's Radical Candor. This is all about feedback. So it's getting the balance right between challenging somebody and being willing to push them, but also demonstrating that you care. And she uses a 4-box model She talks about it kind of tongue-in-cheek that we all love a 4-box model, working on the basis that the right blend is the challenge plus care, that if you have too much care and not enough challenge, we're just being too nice to people, that if we're challenging them too much and not being caring to them, then that's got downsides to it as well. So there's the book. There's a 6-minute intro to it on a YouTube video that I would recommend as well. I can send you the link to that. You could include that in the episode info. We've talked a lot about DISC. You want a good intro to DISC? Surrounded by Idiots is a great place to start.
Surrounded by Idiots, that's an attractive title.
You can see how well this is used, how thumbed it is and stuff. It takes you through in a fairly story type fashion. The different types, the different styles, the D's, the I's, the S's and the C's, and gives it a good intro to it. Again, you can get an intro to it as a YouTube video. There's an app for Surrounded by Idiots as well, so you can have something that's just quick learning on your phone, but that's a good place, I think, as well. And then we talked about building teams, and I'm a big fan of Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Now, this is written as a story. It's written as a fable, as he calls it, of a team that isn't working very well together and a new leader that comes in and takes them through some steps to get them working better together. Again, there's an overview of this. There's lots of resources about it online, but I quite like the story element of it because it brings it to life in a slightly different way than you might see otherwise. And then 2 other things that I always point people to. One of them is looking at the emotional bank account, and that goes back to Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Effective People, and he describes the emotional bank account where you're thinking about making sure that you make deposits into the emotional bank account on the basis that there are going to be times where you either need to or inadvertently make withdrawals. So if something happens that's a withdrawal, which might be things like having to ask somebody to work late, or you have not thought through how to communicate something and it comes out in a way that you didn't intend, those would be examples of withdrawals. If you've got a healthy balance in there in the first place, by doing the right things, by having ongoing conversations, by showing interest in people, caring about them, it balances out, and your relationship shouldn't be too affected by the withdrawals.
So this is this emotional bank account is the bank account between you and one other person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You could argue it could also be between teams too. Right. So having a healthy emotional bank account within a team. But I think that that's a great foundation, as is the concept of psychological safety. So if psychological safety is something that's new to you, I was going to say Google it. Google is a verb nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So look it up. There are loads of different resources on that. The term was coined by a lady called Amy Edmondson. There's plenty of TED Talks, very engaging TED Talks that explain that. But it's making sure that people feel safe in a work environment to ask questions, to make mistakes, to speak up, to challenge things. And I think the emotional bank account plus psychological safety are some very basic foundations for people to work on, for managers and leaders to work on, having in their teams before you start trying to layer anything else on top.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for sharing those resources, Briony. We'll definitely going to we'll put the names of those in the episode description as well.
Great.
Well, thank you so much, Briony. Really appreciate you joining us today on Muhami Matters. For all your insights and your tips, and even just how to get started is really, really useful. It's something that everything we've discussed is something that doesn't always come across my brain. So I'm sure it's a lot of other senior leaders out there are not realizing it either. So I appreciate all your counsel today.
You're very welcome. I've enjoyed it.
So for our audience, if you want to get in touch with Briony, we will share her links in the episode description. And massive thanks to Briony Platt for joining us and for giving us real insights into what it takes to lead with clarity, empathy, and intention, and making a point that you don't just lead from the top. You need to get the middle of your organization working and get it to cascade down from there. For those who would like to hear more insights and support, visit muhami.ae or connect with me at CJA Consulting. I'm Chris Adams. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and take care of your team. Thank you for joining us on Muhami Matters. If you found today's episode valuable, subscribe and connect with me to stay updated. Join me again soon as we continue to bring you credible insights, practical strategies, and trusted advice to empower your professional journey. I'm Chris Adams. Until next time, stay informed and stay empowered.